Scully Man to be the first speaker. Scully is a editorial person, a journalist for China Dialogue. This is an NGO based in London and provide platform for communication between China and I guess EU or UK for that matter on world environment issues. And she's going to talk about ShanZhai from a cultural perspective. So I guess you guys can still continue to eat as a speakers. She can watch you eat while she talk. So, got it.
Well, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a morning that forced me to get up extremely early to meet you guys. All right, so my name is Scully. I work for China Dialogue as a journalist and editor. And Karl and I presented before, and we've been doing this research on ShanZhai phenomenon. And as a journalist, I can't stop feeling that this is a cultural phenomenon we're talking about. And in my presentation, I'm going to talk about the cultural aspects, and later on, Karl's going to talk about the technology part. So, not surprisingly, ShanZhai is not a new word in Chinese language. It dates back from the 14th century, coming from the novel Heroes of the Marshes, one of the most famous things in the Chinese history. The word ShanZhai does not only mean mountain fastness as on the surface, but particularly suggests a place where those who rebel against the government, against the powerful and wealthy get together. And ultimately, they are against the authorities. This strong negative attitude comes from the fact that this bunch of people, they could do nothing to change this unfair society in which the wealthy hold almost all the social resources, whereas the poor can do nothing to change their desperate situation. So ultimately, ShanZhai stands for the spirit of rebellion, contempt, and a little bit cynicism. People would say maybe they are not very decent people, but they are smart, and they do have their own theory on justice, and they trust in themselves, in friendship, in fraternity, but not in the laws set by the rulers. So what happened to the word ShanZhai as we come all the way from the 14th century to the 21st century? Transplanted from its rebellious meaning, ShanZhai has actually become a cultural phenomenon in China currently, not only in the mobile industry. As a matter of fact, it is added into the Chinese vocabulary as an adjective used to describe something that is on the edge of the mainstream, that is creatively imitating the famous. What makes them different from exactly imitating is the fact they do try to impress you with the elements that the original doesn't have. So Karl's going to talk about this later, and I believe it'll open your eyes on that. And here we have ShanZhai things, ShanZhai CCTV news, ShanZhai PSP, ShanZhai bicycle, ShanZhai everything. And yes, the Chinese netizens have created almost everything for the famous thing, the ShanZhai edition for everything in China. And actually, I have prepared a video made by netizens. That is a ShanZhai CCTV news. But unfortunately, I can't play it here. But you can I hope you guys can check it out on the internet. It's very funny. So to now, the ShanZhai meaning may have already changed as time changes, but it still stands for the rebellion against culturally the mainstream culture, and in the business field, that would be the monopolies or prestigious companies, whatever you call them. Here's another example of ShanZhai. Look at this. This is a new engine. It's called Baidu, and it's a combination of Baidu, Google, and Yahoo. And this is a creator of ShanZhai. So first of all, why this is happening in China? It has, first of all, have something to do with UC strategy, which I think Karl is going to emphasize later. Is basically about everything the ShanZhai mobile phones have and the branded mobile phones don't have. Until now, you might so think that this is a mere economical behavior we're talking about, whereas people would tend to look for for lower price and more powerful function, and that's it. But well, for ShanZhai, that's not a case. That's not always the case, because as you may already notice, there are so many people talking about ShanZhai so passionately, and as there are ShanZhaiJi websites you can find on the internet, and there are people who would collect several sets of them just for collection, just for being cool, and this has something to do with how the Western culture is impacted by the Chinese. How the Chinese culture is impacted by the Western culture and the nature of the Chinese culture as well. So during the 30 years of reform and opening, the Chinese culture has been changed to a great scale. It is liberating the Chinese people, especially the youth, and individuality, diversity, sense of humor are added into the Chinese culture. So ShanZhai as a culture actually is challenging the rigid hierarchy of the Chinese society. Famous for its adaptation and which is also the reason of its thousands years of survival. The Chinese culture is good at absorbing elements from the outside and makes them its own, and ShanZhai comes to be a very typical example. And the third point is media has been boring, and people are getting tired of merely positive and serious and harmonic topics, harmonic news and reports, harmonic everything. There's this famous quote in the Western media, which is, if it bleeds, it leads, but it seems in China it doesn't work. So as people sense more and more freedom of speech in the society now, they're trying to speak out, even though still above the bottom line, but they're trying to make a change by way of, for example, ShanZhai. And still it has something to do with the urban lifestyle, which in cities like Beijing, like Shanghai, people are suffering from this stressful, high-speed, unstable, monotonous lifestyle, and most importantly, it is repressing. So people tend to look for fun from those creative, even wildly entertaining and eye-catching gadgets that make them stand out from the others. That's why a lot of fashion geeks would like to collect a lot of ShanZhai mobile phones. And here comes the question, what about the future? What are the factors that will be pushing the ShanZhai phenomenon to a new level? Here are some reasons I put on the screen. First of all is for ShanZhaiJi, the performance of their performance in the market competition, the low price, the powerful function, and most importantly, their untiring willingness and swift reaction to satisfy any of the expectations that come from a variety of the market segments, no matter how bizarre they would probably look like. And Karl's going to talk about that later. And the second, it has something to do with urbanization. China now is striding towards urbanization at a full speed than ever. According to a report released by McKinsey last year, by year 2025, there will be 1 billion of the population in China living in cities, and 240 million of them will be migrant workers. And the farmers are flooding into cities seeking for jobs and fortune, and the migrant workers will become the largest group for ShanZhai mobile phones. Thirdly, when you look at this phenomenon from a historical view, it's quite easy for you to realize that actually this is a very typical development model that is followed by the private business during the 30 years of reform and opening in China. The speed private business has been grow up and expand was marvelous, and starting from low price, low quality, even not very decent market behavior, as they would take advantage of the inadequacy of regulation and its implementation. The private businesses, they would accumulate resources and upgrade their products. In this way, they become competitive, and with upgraded products, examples are like iGo, Lenovo, and of course in the mobile industry, like K-Touch. Last but not least, when you think about the younger generation, especially those who were born after the 80s, the ShanZhai mobile phone satisfied their desire for being cool, for being bodily creative, and this sees no stop in the near future. Conclusion, though we cannot guarantee a bright future for every one of those ShanZhai mobile phones. This interior competition among them is getting stunningly intense. There are actually a lot of ShanZhai companies getting bankrupt these days. But for ShanZhai as a culture, I would say this is a spring for them, and it's just a start. Though the ShanZhai phenomenon, it may not be recorded by the history seriously, but when you think about it, when you think about the desire you see in this phenomenon, people are seeking for freedom of expression, and to challenge the authority, and this is an irreversible trend. That's all for my speech. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Karl Weaver. Karl, you will see his presentation that after the presentation you probably know him better. But previously in his earlier life, and we found out actually Karl now had a lot of cross paths. He worked for Motorola before and been in Taiwan for 10 plus years, etc. But he's now with Yamato, which probably some of you may not know, but if I mention Gen Plus as a SIM card company, a lot of you probably know. Yamato is a French company, and Karl joined the company I think a few years back, and he's now responsible for strategic planning and marketing. And also, I think I should emphasize that Karl is also a teacher, so something that, again, we have something quite in common. So I will not bother you with my poor introduction, because Karl did promise this will be a very dynamic and entertaining talk. So,
Okay. I want to see a ShanZhai handset. Does anyone have one? Where? Anybody have one? Any hidden ShanZhai people here? Anybody? Whoa, okay. Nobody. Oh, that's disappointing. My name is Karl Weaver. I am a wireless market mobile device specialist. I have been doing business with the greater Chinese markets for a number of years. I am a technology public speaker as well. I am presenting under the guise of Newport Technologies today. Please remember that. And I like to talk about controversial topics, always. Today's table of contents, I'm going to go rapid fire. I have over 59 slides, so I have to go fast. Now, let's talk about the evolution of the global handset industry. So who invented the first cell phone? Ooh, Julia. No?
I'm not the expert.
Who invented the first cell phone?
I saw an article last week, and I think that name's.
Was it Karl Weaver?
No, it wasn't.
It was Motorola, and the guy that made the first wireless phone communication is an eccentric fellow by the name of Martin Cooper, when he worked for Motorola. I met the fellow, an interesting guy. Now, so let's talk about the evolution of ShanZhai. So, how did this ShanZhai phenomenon start? Well, I have been tracking the mobile industry in Asia from its beginning. And let's talk about the Chinese markets. You can see here that back in the year 2000, There were no Chinese brands. There were some Taiwanese brands just starting, but there are no Chinese brands. Moto, hello Moto, Motorola and Nokia. These were the two companies in China, and they had the lion's share. But of course, Taiwanese companies started to chip away a bit, and other foreign companies. Eventually, mainland Chinese companies entered the market. They entered the market around 2003. Ningbo, anybody know Ningbo Bird? Remember this company? They had a huge market share in 2003. By now, they're almost gone away. This market changes so rapidly. You have to be aware of it. 2005, what happened is the Chinese government said, okay, we want 40 companies, or we have basically 40 companies that are registered to manufacture in China in 2005, because it was getting very unorganized. Everybody was jumping in, and nobody knew who the real manufacturers were with the companies that just put the brand on there. And actually, that situation hasn't changed that much today. People don't know who the real manufacturers are. After this presentation, you will have a better clue, or you have a better idea of that. Now, in 2006, Tianyu Lantong became the first real private organization that developed a handset using a MediaTek chip and their own RTOS software. So that was a feature phone, right? Not a smartphone. And in 2007, basically the government said, well, let's do away with this requirement to actually have a license to manufacture in China. And that opened the floodgates around 2007. It basically opened the floodgates. In 2008, Lenovo kind of basically sold their handset division, so split it from their notebook division, and now it's kind of a private entity. It's still somewhat part of the organization, but I haven't figured out exactly how it's structured now. They have an office here in Beijing, Zhongguancun. 2009, what we see is the major Tier 1 handset vendors, the sales are plummeting. I think our friends here at Nokia will probably not feel so happy about this, but the fact is ShanZhai is affecting the Tier 1 handset manufacturers. And it's not in a positive way. It's actually in a negative way. And I think the real problem here is, if I put a Nokia handset, the real thing, and then I put a counterfeit one, if I'm a savvy Westerner, I can probably figure out the difference. But if you're coming from the third world and you've never seen the real thing, and you see the one that looks like the real thing, oh, Houston, we have a problem. Because emerging markets around the world, the people aren't familiar with the real thing, and when the ShanZhai comes in, you have a situation where they may choose the ShanZhai because, oh, it's cheaper, seems to be the real thing, looks like the real thing, almost like Nokia. And maybe they can't even spell the difference between N-O-K-I-A and N-C-K-I-A, which is a common problem. They basically rebrand the name, and the handset is basically using a MediaTek chip. So I'll talk more about that. All right. This is what I call the Greater China Integration Strategy. Taiwan is the source for much of the R&D in the mobile handset space today, coming from a lot of vendors. And Motorola, in fact, was using Taiwan quite extensively, from 80, almost, well, they said from 66%, now it's gone back down to 50. But basically, China was the assembler and manufacturing side of this whole Greater China Integration Strategy. But that is changing because many Taiwanese companies have their factories here in China. In fact, Honghai, which is the largest electronics manufacturer in the world, they make all the iPods and the iPhones, and they also make cell phones too. They are actually in Shenzhen producing just millions and millions of handsets per day, and it's a Taiwanese organization. In fact, they are the largest exporter in China, which is it's a Taiwanese company. So you can see what's going on here. It's this what I call the Greater China Integration Strategy. Let me go quicker now. Let's talk about globalization. I taught globalization at Seattle University in 2007, 2008. Was very honored to do that. What I discovered is my whole professional career involving the Chinese world had a lot to do with the globalization of things occurring, and also something I call the Pacific Century, 太平洋时期. So I've been talking about Pacific Century for about almost 10 years now. It's not a new concept, but it has a lot to do with technology. There were 3 phases of globalization that have occurred. The first phase really was us Westerners looking for a path to China and India. Marco Polo went to China. When he came back, he said, "Wow, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. You've got all kinds of technology going on in China." This is in the 1200s. And from that point on, when the Europeans, the West, figured out that there's this mythical place called China, they were looking for a path to China, and eventually India. In fact, Columbus, he wasn't looking for America. He was looking for India. He was looking for India. And what happened is from the 14th century on, this basic Silk Road occurred and started, and along the way, all these influences from Asia and from the Middle East basically influenced the Westerners, and they were looking for resources, spices, gold, everything you can imagine, tea as well. Now, again, the Portuguese discovered Formosa. I don't know how they feel about that here, but they used to call that Ilha Formosa. The Portuguese said, "Wow, beautiful island, beautiful island." They went to Taiwan for a short period of time, then they eventually went back to Macau. They decided to stay in Macau. The Dutch, the French, the English, the Spanish, and even the Americans and Japanese came later, but the Dutch East Indian Company, Jardine Matheson, Hutchinson, Whampoa, they basically colonized India, and they used, of course, opium to feed to the Chinese. So there's a kind of negative thing there. But basically, it's the West trying to open up. That's the first phase of globalization. Second phase, it's really an American lake, essentially, which is that after the Second World War, America became the mightiest superpower economically and militarily. We still are. Our economics are a different story right now. But the key point here is, if you look at the reconstruction of the trading system after the Second World War, the Marshall Plan and the Dodge Plan, basically America's golden age was from 1950 to 1973. And the gold standard, which is, well, anyway, that was the gold standard then. Of course, then the dollar system came about. And the almighty US dollar is now basically what's used. The U.S. long-term competitiveness, though, it started to decline in the 80s. It started to decline because basically American manufacturers were taking technology offshore to places like Japan and eventually Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, Hong Kong. And then those little dragons built up their economies by exporting products back to the West, Europe, and America. Okay, so that's basically driving down American competitiveness because we're actually transferring technology. It is incorrect to think that people from another country cannot completely duplicate your product and eventually overcome the technological gap and actually create their own technology. So we're talking about innovation here, creativity coming from the original OEMs that the Western companies put their factories in Asia for mainly for the purpose of manufacturing, not to expect your competitor to outdo you. But that's exactly what's happened. That is exactly what's happened. Now, let's go to the third phase. Okay, well, third phase here, which is basically China and India as well. I do a lot of public speaking about China and India. And what we're talking about is the reemergence, for this presentation today, we're talking about China's reemergence after 600 years. What we see is we see the dragon flexing its muscle. We see the dragon ever so bold and reclaiming its natural place in the trading system and also as one of the world's leaders. It's a leading country. Chinese want to be number one. They do not want to be number two. Okay? Now, at this point in time, let's keep this to discussion about ShanZhaiJi. But the key point here is the microcomputer industry. This is what's leading the way, the technology, the electronics industry. Asia, and in particular now, the greater Chinese markets are booming. They are developing and creating new technologies. Okay? That has the West fearful. But the West transferred technology originally with a very short-term mentality. So we are basically, right now, looking at the situation where we want to protect our intellectual property in China. Well, I think that we have to look at the situation where many of these countries in Asia are equal in terms of manufacturing, in terms of developing technology. We have to look at that as a real obvious situation. Now, the third wave we talk about, let's talk about how technology goes from one place to another. I think this is a very interesting point. And the Chinese are going to occur, this is going to occur to the Chinese as well eventually. The British developed the Industrial Revolution, essentially, and that was about 200 years ago, 150 years ago. But they wanted to protect it. They thought that you could keep the technology in Britain, and basically they were wrong. You can't. People left, technology transferred to the best place where it needs to be for innovation, creativity. Okay, so it went to the United States East Coast, up and down the American East Coast. I'm from New England. I'm very, very proud of being Bostonian. And I think the key point is when I was growing up, we were, you know, New England was a key manufacturing center for many things. And it has been for over 100 years, if you know your American history. But things started to change around the 80s in terms of technology. So do you remember Lotus Development Corp? Remember Lotus? Remember Digital Equipment Corp? How about Wang Labs? Ring any bell? They're all gone. Why? Because they didn't understand that technology cannot be controlled. It keeps traveling to the best place where it needs to go. And in this case, it went to the United States West Coast, to the Silicon Valley, Sunnyvale, Cupertino, San Jose, and to the Silicon Forest, which is Seattle, which is where I make my home now. And basically, it stayed on the West Coast from the late 70s to the 80s to the 90s, okay? Even though technology was transferring into Taiwan in the 80s and into China in the 80s, it really wasn't until the 90s and the late 90s when this whole internet bust occurred. And then many Chinese and Indian nationals said, I'm leaving, I'm not coming back. There's better opportunity in China. I'm sick of getting laid off here in Silicon Valley looking for another job. What they realized is that technology has gone back to their home countries, and they wanted to be pioneers leading that change in their own countries. And so they came back and started new companies, and that is the emphasis for the technology development going on here now. These people are very highly trained. These are leaders in the community right now, and a lot of them, thankfully, got their education from the United States, so they have that still closeness with North America, Europe as well, North America, Australia to a lesser extent. But this whole technology did not stay in America now on the West Coast. It came to China and to India and to all these other countries to a lesser extent. And it is there now. This is where it is now. This is the center of the manufacturing industry for the mobile device space. I can't do my job unless I'm in Greater China because this is where everything is happening. Now, let's go on. Let's have a little bit of a Chinese lesson. ShanZhaiJi, Beijing Opera. What does ShanZhaiJi mean? Okay, this is basically, Scully mentioned it before. It's a very interesting phenomenon, but let's use the term ShanZhai. Some would call me a ShanZhai. I have a ShanZhai spirit in many instances as well, and I think some of you have a ShanZhai spirit as well. So please understand that I am neither positive, I am very neutral with regard to this whole ShanZhai discussion in that I'm only reporting the facts, but the concept of ShanZhai is an interesting thing that we need to be aware of. Of course, many of these companies are just illegally counterfeiting technology from other vendors. Of course, yes, absolutely. But there is another element that needs to be understood here. If you want to understand the root of something, you have to do the investigation, and I've done it. Okay. Which one is the real Apple iPhone? How do you like this? 中国爱苹果手机. So which one is the real one? Which one? Which one is real? Do you know? Anybody know? Okay, so it's the one on the left. This one. I have one. So what is a mobile phone? Do you know, in fact, you can actually buy a mobile phone, a ShanZhai phone, that's also a shaver. So you can talk and, wait a minute, I gotta shave and talk again. There you go. I love one of those phones. I've been looking for one. Again, for the record, I do not own a ShanZhai phone. I do not own one. I own 3 phones right now. I have a Moto Q9, which is a very good phone, Q9H. I have the iPhone, 16 gig. I have a Palm Pro. Those are the 3 mobile phones that I own. I'd love to own a BlackBerry, but nobody from my friend from RIM isn't here, so anyway. Oh, okay, where's Greg? I'm looking for Greg. We'll chat later. Okay, so, all right, so, okay, let's talk about what a ShanZhai is, a ShanZhai phone is. First of all, some would say it's not legal, or it's a gray area, semi-legal. It's semi-legal. What does that mean? I'll explain about MediaTek, okay? But it's not going to have the real name of the vendor because they can be tricky. Wow, 你很 tricky. Nokia, NCKIA, or Samsung, or something like that. Basically something that's close, so it looks like the real thing. Now think about this. If I'm from the third world, I'm a farmer from the third world, and I see both handsets, and I'm trying to figure out, I don't speak English very well, and I want to buy a good handset with a lot of features, I'm going to have a tough time distinguishing the real from the fake. This is the real problem, Houston. This is the real problem. All right, so you can find all kinds of things printed on the box, but not the real address of the manufacturer, or at least not the real address of the company that made the product. And so they have these phony names. They have printed all kinds of funky things, including the features of the handset on the box. Really powerful features. Wow, really cool speakers, high quality speakers on some of these handsets, better than the originals. And they have pretty impressive innovation going on there as well. They have the gesture sense, the sensors for gesture and motion, really cool stuff that you can only see on certain handsets. And these phones have become part of the non-mainstream culture. They simply are. I see people in my apartment elevator, and I say, that's a ShanZhai. They say, wow, you know what that is? I say, yeah, I sure do. Let's talk about the spirit. So it's extremely creative, brave, not to pay too much attention about the low profit. So if I went to, quite honestly, if I went to a Western handset manufacturer and I said, hey, I want to put a shaver in the bottom, what do you think? I would get thrown out the door. But if I went to Shenzhen and I went to the heart of ShanZhai land, and I basically went to a vendor and I said, can you make these? They would more than likely very interestingly look at the possibility to make those. So you see the difference. Western vendors cannot spend their time going after what they call non-mainstream products for the markets they're going after, because they don't just sell in China, they have to sell to the world. And many of these companies don't want to be known as selling flaky or funky kinds of cell phones. They're professional organizations. Where there's a ShanZhai, I don't care what you call them. They don't care what you call them. So basically, they're creating new demand, even where something didn't exist. A shaver phone, come on. Nothing's impossible, and they'll tackle the biggest problem. They're interested to tackle the biggest problem. Now, the way to succeed, basically, there's a lot of multi-level and diversified market channels in China, and they're going after them. Mobile phones have become an everyday consumable item. Of course, we all have them. And this is so for any reporters in here today, this is the quote that I usually use. We're witnessing the rise of the hacker entrepreneurs, and it's the classic Silicon Valley legend taken to the back streets of Shenzhen, which is truly what's happening. All right, this is ShanZhai Guo. This is the center. So if you're looking for it, you want to know where it is? Here it is. All right? All right. Now, let's talk about Taiwan. Oh, okay. Well, I'll tread lightly. Taiwan is the golden egg that basically China uses. Taiwan inside. Kind of like Intel inside, but not exactly. All right? So, largest handset market, right? China ships 8 million handsets per month. Interesting, okay? And since 2007, these kind of like white box, they're calling them white box, by the way, gray market white box vendors. It's another way to say ShanZhai, okay? They've captured a huge amount of the market. MediaTek, Lianfake. Lianfake MediaTek is a Taiwanese company that is creating disruptive innovation in the society here in China with their chip for the mobile handset industry. Started with Tianyu. I will show you how Tianyu came from a baby, ShanZhai, to birth as a global brand, or close to a global brand anyway. That's their aspiration. All right. Now these cheap bandit phones, they're carved out a massive niche for themselves in China. And they're going after rural environment. They're going after these rural subscribers as well. They're cheap. And these rural people don't read Wall Street Journal every day, so they're not knowing that they're actually ShanZhai. Well, they don't care either. So these 900 million rural dwellers, that's the market that everyone's going after. Nokia, Moto, everyone's going after those because everybody in coastal China knows what a cell phone is. They know Hello Moto. Everybody knows what that is, and also the Nokia handset. So, but technically 250 million ShanZhai handsets were produced in 2008. Now, nobody in the world can actually give you an exact figure, not even Karl Weaver, but I'm getting real close. I say 200 to 250 million of these were sold in 2008. That's my estimate. This is the annual output for handsets, and as you can see, it's continuing to rise, almost 700 million handsets, over 600 million handsets right now in China. And this is some newer information. This is March 2009 for the ranking. Of course, Nokia is still at 31%, still number 1. Samsung's number 2. Moto number 3. But look what Tianyu Lantong is number 4. Zhongxing, and LG, and then Huawei. You might say, Huawei? What's the story with Huawei? Well, Huawei doesn't really sell handsets inside China. This is their first venture to sell handsets. They're selling to China Unicom. Otherwise, Huawei sells OEM to the Western, Vodafone, and some of those other companies. Let's look at the mobile phone sales, though. As you can see, they're going down. The sales, the volume of production may be going up, but the sales are actually going down. And the cost of a fake has been estimated by, I'm sorry, I don't give the credits. This is the New York Times did an article, and they basically said about 40 bucks. This is from a famous organization here, BDA, and they estimated 20% of the market is ShanZhai, or illegal or gray, and the rest, the 80%, is legit. So this is not stuff I'm making up in the air. I have all kinds of resources for this information. And so if you look at the Chinese domestic market, now let's distinguish the two different things here. Chinese-made handset from a well-established Western brand accepted by the operators, like Tianyu is accepted by all 3 operators, and Lenovo, Changhong, Haier, all of these companies are not ShanZhai, but they use the MediaTek chip. Okay, but they're also being affected by ShanZhai. So please, let's make sure that we get this very, very clear. And so ShanZhai is impacting, really, everyone. This is basically if you want to buy a cell phone, how do you buy it? Where do you buy it? Do you go directly to the operator? You can go to the operator's designated stores, but a lot of people don't go to, I have to go to China Mobile to buy my cell phone. No, you can buy your cell phone anywhere. These are just the channels where you could buy your cell phone. Hence, what I saw in Singapore, which is very, very interesting. I was in Singapore about a month ago, and I went to Sim Lim Square. If you know Singapore, that's where all the cell phones are sold. Guess what? You go into the store, you can see all the the tier 1 vendors, but there's always a ShanZhai stall with a ShanZhai lady who's somehow studying in Singapore, and you talk to them, they're from the rural provinces of China, and they're the ones selling the ShanZhai handsets, and they're doing brisk business. Okay, so the ShanZhai phenomenon is not just in China. It's in Taiwan. You can find it in Hong Kong. You can find it in Singapore. You can find it in India. In fact, the Indian government had to stop non-branded handsets, and so they're trying to cut it out from the market. Thailand, anyway, it's all over. Probably in the West too. Probably in the West. We just don't know that it's penetrated North America. I guarantee you it has. Probably. Probably. Now, these bandit phone characteristics, let's talk about it a bit. Wow, isn't that cool? Spider-Man or Batman cell phone. Wow, wouldn't you like one of those? Maybe not you or I, but a 10-year-old kid would love one, right? How about this, a paparazzi phone? So basically, they're cool. They're cool looking. They have unique functions and features. And they're stylish. And they've got innovation. 什么是ShanZhaiJi? ShanZhaiJi. What is a ShanZhaiJi? Well, these are some of the distinguishing things. Legal is not what I would call a ShanZhaiJi, because ShanZhaiJis are not legal. Now, what type of handset can we expect? Well, we got Buddha Mobile here. Basically, you can see 7 speaker phones. Wow, boombox. Young kids can now go, they don't have to go to the disco anymore. They put the handset there, and then they can hear the music coming from this boombox. Wow, tremendous. You can create your own party. There you go. So you have, I saw a cell phone that said, Hello Kitty. And when the thing rang, it had 12 different colors illuminating. Wow, it was fantastic. I said, ships can use that coming into harbor. There you go. It was very, very interesting. As senior citizens, they also have handsets with louder voice, bigger keycaps so that people can, older people can use it. You know, we have a generational gap here. Older people, they're not so tech savvy. We'll all get there one day. All of us, we'll all get there, trust me. But we have to take care that our senior citizens are not so techie geeky. They just want something that works, basically. And we have a religious handset here, blessed by monks. Oh yes, these handsets are blessed by eminent monks. So, well, maybe we can have one for Catholics. I mean, I could probably use one. And all of these handsets typically support 2 SIM cards. But the first company I saw supporting 2 SIM cards was, Coolpad. You know that company? They were the first company I saw to do 2 SIM cards. A company down in Shenzhen. They're not a ShanZhai company. It's actually quite a good company. All right. So this basically looks like a normal phone, right? Turn it over. Wow! We have a woofer, a tweeter, whatever you want. 2 amplifiers vibrating. This one claims that you can use it for 366 days. Whoa! What's that all about? Nokia, guys, you might want to find out where the hell that battery comes from. I'm just joking. All right, so these are some of the handsets. I'm going to go through this real quick. Some of the handsets that are in the market. This is very interesting stuff. Let's start with this. Whoa! So for our smokers in the crowd, you can buy a cigarette cell phone. Yeah, where are the matches? I don't know. But basically, a cigarette cell phone. As you can see, you put your cigarettes here. You can put any brand you want, and you talk on the other side. Many famous brands here. Okay, how about this one? Marlboro. Now, this is a cell phone that looks like a car. Chinese people are into new cars, right? Hey, look at my new car. Yeah, it's really a cell phone. Oh, how cool. For us Europeans who like the Mercedes-Benz, there you go. There you can find your Mercedes-Benz cell phone. This is what we call the Big Thunder, which is more of like the boombox approach with, as you notice, 2 SIM cards there. And basically, it's meant for a large. Actually, one of the things they use it for is for farmers who lose the cell phone, and so what they need to do is have another phone to call it to know where to locate it in the field. Because once they put it down, they don't always know where it is. They're talking on the phone, they're tending to the sheep, and then it's somewhere in the grass. Oh my goodness, where's my cell phone? And when you call it, it has a very high ringtone, very, very loud. It's almost like riot police. So these big thunder phones, they call them. You ever seen one of these? It's really cool. A lot of speakers. Now, we have a paparazzi phone. So you attach the lens to a cell phone, and it becomes a paparazzi phone. Just another example of a paparazzi phone. it can also do closed circuit monitoring. So some people need that. I mean, it's a positive and a negative thing here. If you have a child in your home and the child, you put the child there and you put the cell phone, if you put the cell phone there and you can monitor, you put a closed circuit element camera, and then you can monitor it with the cell phone as you're walking around the home. The child may be on the second floor, so you can actually hear and see the child, and that's kind of cool. I mean, that's a positive thing. Of course, the negative thing is these peeping toms who want to peep on our charming young Mamie right there. But these paparazzi phones, they have another function that I've seen, which is they are currency authenticators. Very interesting. As you see there, I wonder, can anybody tell me what money that is? Look at the money there. That's 100. Is it renminbi? What is it? We'll save it for another day. Now, we talked about this closed circuit situation. You can monitor people, and that does not look like a dopoda, a real dopoda. That is not a real dopoda. Does anybody know what dopod? Dopod is actually a joint venture with HTC here, a Taiwanese company. I guarantee you that's not the real thing. Now, does anybody remember, I'm going to date myself, but maybe this gentleman here knows, remember, hey, Dick Tracy, Car 51, where are you? Basically, the comic books had Dick Tracy who could have a cell phone on his wristwatch, right? Remember that? No? So, Car 51, where are you? Well, isn't that kind of cool? So you can talk on your wristwatch, and you can communicate with somebody else on the phone. These exist now. These are not, these actually exist. Cell phone wristwatch cell phones. Now, let's get to something very, very interesting. The fake iPhone. Who here has a fake iPhone? Come on, you've all seen one. Come on, don't look at me. I'm not selling them. But basically, you'll find people with the iPhone saying, "Hey, look at my iPhone," only to find out you turn it over. It's not the real thing. It's a counterfeit. It works, basically. It works. So the key point is, it's not the real thing. It does similar functions, but 5 minutes playing with it, you know it's not the real thing. But it is creative. There's creativity going on there. This is just a transformation handset. It just folds up and out many different ways. Who's into luxury? Who's into luxury? There you go. You can have your very expensive gold-plated cell phone. Wow. Good if you have a cavity. If you have a filling, you need a filling, you can melt it down for gold. Gold is worth a lot these days. So basically, they're going after the luxury, 800 renminbi luxury market. Now, this is the PlayStation Portable, and the ShanZhaiJi claim that they actually came out with this before Sony. They had this gaming device before Sony, or so it has been claimed. You can see the difference here. Kind of cool, isn't it? So let's not be stubborn about creativity. It comes in many forms. It comes in many fashions. It comes in many parts of the world. It isn't just Western-centric. Key point here. Oh, okay, fuwa. I want a fuwa. Does anybody want a fuwa? 很可爱的 fuwa, right? So during the Olympics last year, you could buy one of these cell phones with the fuwa. Does everyone know what fuwa is? It's basically the mannequins that were used. Is that the right word? The mascots that were used during the Olympics last year. And again, Buddha preserves me. So, what do you think about buying a phone that is blessed by eminent monks? Wouldn't that be enlightening? Wouldn't that be? If I were a Buddhist, I would find that enlightening. Maybe after this presentation, I should become a Buddhist. Okay. Now, this is what they call ShanZhai's little brother. What it is, basically, there's a company in the United States called Oakley. And Oakley has this kind of very expensive, I think they're working with Motorola. Oakley has this very expensive glasses, sunglasses, and it has MP3 player. Maybe Oakley and Motorola basically combined for this. Anyway, you can buy them in Shenzhen. I've seen them. Now, let's get back to, okay, so we've gone through some of the ShanZhai products, right? Let's get back to the whole reasoning behind why this is occurring now. It's because of this company, Lianfake. Okay, so basically, MediaTek rules the ShanZhai because they are the ones supplying the semiconductor silicon. Do you know, in the cell phone industry, it really is pretty much controlled by the semiconductor silicon chips on the handset. And what MediaTek did, basically, is they understood the Chinese market. They are creating something called MTK inside. You talk to any engineer who does mobile devices, and you say MTK, they know. Lianfake. So it's a revolution here, basically, that they've launched in China. It's a destructive innovation revolution that's going on here with MediaTek. And let me continue. So MediaTek, this is the guy who runs the company. 90% share of China's mobile phone chip market. Wow! Hello, Houston. We really have a problem now because it's eating into the tier 1 vendors' markets. It's also eating into some of the Chinese brands, although many of the Chinese brands now use the MediaTek chip. ZTE uses MediaTek's chip. Lenovo, Tianyu uses all MediaTek. 160 million chipsets were sold in 2007. That's only 2007. I don't have figures for 2008 yet, but system on a chip is creating a disruptive innovation revolution. Key point. And this system on a chip, what does that mean? It basically takes all the functions, incorporates them into a single chip, and then how it works is the MediaTek sales rep would go to the handset manufacturer and they would actually design and customize, 定做, customize the chip right in the features on that the chip, that the handset needs from the chip, go back, put the die in place, and actually in 3 months, not 9 months, you can now have a new handset. Okay, so the ShanZhai are creating low volume, low cost, quick to market devices. So this is what's a challenge for the established tier 1 handset manufacturers. This is what's causing them to have sleepless nights. Basically, this is it. And the guts are still coming from Taiwanese companies as well. Let me show you. Let me show you. Look. Look at this. It's Taiwan inside. It's all Taiwanese semiconductor and parts components vendors. I can create a Karl Weaver cell phone if I want. I go to Shenzhen. I have an idea for a phone. Maybe it's a Razr phone. I get the chip. I go and source the components. I go to a no-name factory in Shenzhen. I say, build 100,000 of these for me. And I can sell them as Karl Weaver cell phones. I won't do that because I'm not a ShanZhai. But the key point is, it's Taiwan technology. Foxconn is Honghai. Fusikang and Honghai. Same company. Very, very large corporation in Taiwan. Disruptive innovation from a silicon chip. Basically, MediaTek is the original, what we call the catalyst for these bandit cell phones, because they're just a company that makes a silicon chip that caters to these handsets. And by the way, MediaTek is very sensitive about being called a ShanZhai catalyst, because they're selling to Lenovo, MediaTek. They're selling to traditional Chinese handset vendors as well. So to call them that would be a little bit misleading, actually. What they are doing is creating an innovative development here. What's the term that I used? Innovative disruption. That's the term I used. So Taiwanese ODMs were serving big ODMs in the past, and they didn't have this opportunity. But with MediaTek around now, many of these companies can have chips designed in a very short period of time, and they can compete with the tier 1 vendors. So I think that the tier 1 handset manufacturers need to look at a way that they can cooperate with MediaTek, because it seems very obvious to me that MediaTek has figured out a successful method to compete with the tier 1 vendors in the greater Chinese marketplace. Very obvious. So the point that I'm making is I'm just stating facts. That's all I'm doing today. ShanZhaiJi, by any other name, again, the brand of handsets coming out. These are Chinese brands, by the way. So the Chinese brands, and this is Chinese brands, not ShanZhai. This is just Chinese brands. So they're increasing. Lenovo is increasing. Tianyu, ZTE, Huawei. The local Chinese brands are increasing. That's causing trouble also for the Tier 1 vendors. So if I'm a Tier 1 handset manufacturer, Moto and Nokia, I'm just pulling my hairs out because I got this local innovation going on by branded companies. I got the ShanZhai going on here, and then I'm still trying to brand. We're Nokia. We're the best. It's difficult for them, quite honestly. Well, part of this is because a number of years ago, the handset vendors and the chip guys had a little cooperation in that they basically MediaTek's chips combined a lot of different functions, and basically handset vendors are able to streamline the production. And as I said, they can go from 9 months back down to 3 months for the development of a handset. But really, originally, the chip vendors and the handset vendors were closely connected in that the handset vendor said, I want this function, you will make this volume, and that's all that you will do. Unfortunately, for them, MediaTek came along and said, well, you want whatever you want, we'll do. And we'll do it in a very short period of time. And we'll customize the chip, and we'll customize the features of the handset. So you want a Razor? No problem. You want FM radio? No problem. We can do it. We can do it. Computer turnkey operating model. This is what MediaTek has. It's a turnkey model, as you can see here. They're also going, as I said, into these emerging markets. So Africa, Middle East, Indonesia, all of these emerging markets now have these ShanZhaiJi handsets. If you don't believe this, go and ask. They're all over. They're all over the emerging markets. And of course, MediaTek is promoting that in a place like India, as I told you, even Singapore. Now, this is a key point. Again, when I make this presentation, I am on the neutral side. My objective here is just to present. And what I'm trying to say here is that you can actually see that China's handset industry started here. It was mostly the Western brands, no Chinese brands. And the Chinese saying, hey, what's that all about? We know how to innovate. We know how to produce handsets. The Taiwanese came in, and they realized they had to have licenses for the Western and the Chinese companies. They had the licenses. Then here, basically, government said, oh, free for all. You don't need a license. You can produce. The Chinese government was trying to stir innovation from the domestic side. They know the foreigners have technology, but not the Chinese companies. So this is a way to stir innovation from the Chinese side. And so the possibility is by 2008, you could be, if you played your cards right, sold your products well, had good quality, and started to pay for royalties, you, as a former ShanZhaiJi company, could become legal, legit, pay for licenses, pay for royalties. And so by 2009, you could actually partner with China Mobile or China Telecom, because I can guarantee you they do not like ShanZhaiJi. And the reason is because when you look at a ShanZhaiJi, when you take out the battery, the back of the battery, the IMEI is not real. And if you have no IMEI, you have no way to know what the features and functions of this handset are. And I want to make a pitch here, which is that ShanZhaiJi can also be very, very dangerous, actually. Because, number one, the batteries tend to blow up, number one. Number two, the radiation emitting from what we call the SAR, not SARS, but SAR, specific absorption rate of the handset, could exceed the registered limits by the Chinese, by the FCC, and by various organizations. If that happens, and if you are using a handset that exceeds that, means you're getting more radiation into your ear and into your brain than you would want. This is another controversy I don't wish to get into right now. Anyway, the key point here is you can become the rising star. Now, this talks a little bit about the blue ocean strategy. Does anybody know what blue ocean strategy is? What is blue ocean strategy? Anybody know? Okay, basically, blue ocean strategy is a way to make your competition irrelevant. No! Boo! You're gone. No more you. This is what MediaTek is doing to the chip vendors around the world, and they are concerned. And MediaTek has been successful. Some would say Apple iPhone is a similar type of disruptive innovation. Some would say no, they just had a better vision of how to sell a cell phone and make it more user-friendly with its user experience. That's what others would say. No, it's not real innovation. I think it's innovation. Anyway, if you look here, basically, the mobile phones have become an everyday consumable item, and I've got kind of a SWOT here to show you how this is coming about. I'll make these slides available so you can see it later on. Here's my conclusion now, and then we'll take questions. The globalization of technology has caused the global supply chain to shift. So what we have is a subtle redistribution of wealth and technology from the West to the East. It's been going on for 10, 15 years. It's become very, very obvious when a guy sitting in Shenzhen can produce a cell phone that can genuinely compete with the Nokia handset. You can see that you find this innovation going on. So, second thing is it's continuing to migrate west. So China, you're not going to have this monopoly forever. It'll go to the Middle East, it'll go to Africa. If you think you will maintain this monopoly just because you are China or you are Chinese people, sorry, you won't. It'll go and continue to go to the next place where there's a thirst for innovation. And it isn't only China. Okay? Let's be very obvious, very straightforward with that. The local Chinese and ShanZhaiJi handset market vendors, but in any way, actually, it may be Chinese companies sending the technology to India and to Africa. Okay, so let's be very straightforward. It could be Chinese companies shipping technology. Okay, that's a definite possibility, along with the Western companies. The local Chinese and ShanZhai handset vendors are very important growing market trends. This blue ocean strategy, it's a disruptive innovation that's going on. And we are witnessing the emergence of a new hacker entrepreneur class. It's kind of like if you've seen that movie where Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, when they were young kids, it showed the story of them in the Silicon Valley. Did you ever see that geeky movie? This is no different. In many ways, this is no different. This is no different. So that's the end of my presentation, and Scully and I will take questions now. Thank you. I hope it was interesting.
Anyone have any questions? What's stopping Nokia or Motorola, I guess I should ask, from going to MediaTek and say, hey, build us a cell phone that has a shaver and a boombox, and I mean, what's stopping them from doing that?
Who says they're stopping? Who says they're being stopped? Who says they're not talking to them now? I didn't say either statement, but I'm saying that Tier 1 vendors better figure out some kind of strategy. I'm not saying that they are talking to them. I am not saying that they're not talking to them. I'm saying I do not know. But if it were me and I was the CEO here in China, first of all, I'd have a better salary. Second of all, I would realize that if you can't beat them, then you better join them, because it is better to be alive than dead. Right? So I say that they need to figure something out. Maybe don't count out Nokia, Motorola, and Samsung, at least the top 3 guys, because, come on up here, Scully. These companies are global powerhouses. They encounter a problem and they figure out a way to solve it. That's all I want to say. I'm not a spokesman for Nokia, Motorola, or Samsung. I think they can speak for themselves, but this is my opinion.
How do the local or central government officials feel about the ShanZhaiJi phenomenon? And what kind of actions they are doing, or are they doing anything for it?
Well, I'm not a Chinese official who probably make more money than the CEO of Motorola and Nokia, but I would say that if you ask the operators, which are really more important, how they feel, I think that the operators, I'm feeling very positive about allowing counterfeit fake phones into the networks. And the reason is because, as you know, they can harm the network. They can really harm the network in addition to harming the person. And if somebody has a really good lawyer, they could say, well, this operator allowed their SIM card to work on my ShanZhaiJi handset, and now it exploded and I lost my ear. Oh, it's your fault, operator. So I think that this phenomenon is something that the Chinese government absolutely is concerned about, but may not know exactly what to do about. But again, I do not pretend to be the mouthpiece for how the Chinese government feels about this topic. I just say that with my background in the wireless field, I do know that the operators themselves are always concerned about funky, illegitimate handsets with no IMEI, because they themselves have no way to control it if it has no IMEI. They don't even know what handset it is in their network. So I say that the operators are concerned. The Chinese government, I mean, let's get a Chinese government official to comment on that, not Karl Wheeler. You want to comment on that?
Or no worse than mobile phones provided by at least the local mobile phone producers. And though there are some issues like explosion, but they still happen in branded mobile phones. So I think this is bad news for those branded mobile phones.
Yes.
I've been asking the question, ShanZhaiJi illegal product. My definition really falls into two. I mean, if it is illegal, correct me if I'm wrong, it really falls into two categories. One is that the appearance looks like an iPhone. So the technology itself is not illegal. The packaging is illegal. So that's why in my mind. Second, I like to follow again. We were talking about how do you follow the money, the money portion of the business. If the MediaTek, the manufacturer, do they pay the royalty? If they pay the royalty, then the money side is no, in my mind, there's no problem. If they don't pay, then the ShanZhai manufacturer, they're not paying royalty. Then that's, in my mind, again, that's the definition of illegal. Am I right or correct?
First point is when you have components which are legal components, I mean regularly produced components, and then you simply assemble them and use them to build a handset in a factory, that's not illegal.
That's right.
Okay.
So ShanZhai ban doesn't automatically mean illegal.
It doesn't.
That's right.
Especially using a MediaTek chip, because MediaTek owns its own IP for its chip. MediaTek is not a ShanZhai company. Yes?
May I comment? I little bit disagree. First of all, MediaTek does not pay for IP and royalties. First point. Secondly, those devices, they are required to kind of pass the Chinese kind of regulations. I mean, the certifications, CCC and the others, the radio license and then the now license, and they don't go through any of these certifications, so that by the Chinese law, they are all illegal because they do not go through the certification.
That's a very, very good point in that when you don't pay, but when you don't pay, have it certified, then it is. Well, let me just state, I don't want to start controversy, but it is still not illegal to assemble a cell phone, but to try to sell it to an operator without the certifications and without being tested, that is illegal. Let me be very, very clear. And you're right about MediaTek. You're right about MediaTek, but MediaTek, again, only makes the semiconductor chip. They make the semiconductor chip and they sell it mostly in China. But please.
A couple of comments. I think the point is that how MediaTek responses is that it's the handset vendors' job to pay the royalties, and I think that's probably the way it works in many kinds. Like it's not the motorless chip vendor that is paying the royalties.
But then we have 2,000 ShanZhaiJi companies, so it's a little bit difficult to track those companies. So that's why they are kind of getting out of the responsibility.
So that actually answers my question. If MediaTek doesn't pay the royalty, and it's already up to the handset manufacturer to pay the royalty, then the money side, you can cash them.
Yeah, because MediaTek doesn't make a cell phone, so, and Lord knows they don't want to make a cell phone because then they realize all the problems of doing that. They don't actually make the cell phone, so the responsibility does really rest with the person who wants to make the cell phone and use all the components and get it so-called legal.
As you just added the third component, there's a certification process.
Very important, because if it's not certified,
Yeah.
no operator will touch it. But then it comes to the second part, which is they could just have a funky name like Pink Hello Kitty cell phone brand. That would not be illegal because I don't think such a company exists in the world today.
But it doesn't.
But when they
it doesn't
counterfeit
pay.
with the Nokia name or the Samsung name, that is obviously counterfeiting, obviously. And not only is it not legal in the network, now you're infringing on someone's intellectual property. And the key point is a lot of these guys don't care because they come into the market for the sole purpose of making marketing expertise. I think you'd probably agree with that.
So basically, the flip side is that, like Lenovo, they use the chipset from MediaTek, but they pay the royalty. They have their own brand, so they're not infringing any brand, and they do the certification. So all the three components, they fit, so they're not illegal.
Lenovo, Tianyu Lantong, Haier, they pay for licenses and royalties and license their handsets in the network. They're using MediaTek's chip as well.
Yeah, so other than the three components, anything else that make it legal or illegal?
There are many things, and this is a whole contention that the actual Tier 1 vendors will tell you distinguishes them from the counterfeiters. There are many, many cross-license references that you need to go through to actually develop a handset. That's what takes them so long. They have to make sure that they themselves have paid for licenses and aren't infringing on some obscure tech IP that some guy in the United States had. And so even the Tier 1 vendors will tell you they have lawyers working overtime every time they bring out a new handset to make sure that they themselves are complying with all the requirements. And it's so tough because new technology means new IP issues. Am I correct? I mean, so this is why the Tier 1 guys do all the hard work, right? Yet the ShanZhai are taking the profit away. So naturally, the Tier 1 vendors, and even the Chinese companies themselves, like if you ask Lenovo how they feel, they're not going to be very happy about the ShanZhai.
And legally, can I go get after MediaTek and you produce this, you collect the royalty before you.
Well, MediaTek only sells a chip. They sell a chip to a company. That's all they do. They sell a chip to a company. How you take that chip and what you make of that chip is your business.
Going back to MediaTek and the silicon chips that they produce, what IP is there? I mean, do they have their own patents on their own chips that they produce? And
I believe they do. But
I'm not sure.
This fellow may have better knowledge than I, but I believe they do have
They might have something called GSM stack there.
software stack.
I mean, the whole GSM protocol stack, MediaTek has kind of probably zero IP on its GSM technology. It's kind of very basic technology. And then there might be codecs, whatever. They are not developing their own codecs, but they codecs come from elsewhere.
So it's like what we said before, and what Scully said. This could be just a blowing fad that is around right now like a dirty cancer. Who knows? I can't answer that. But the facts are the facts. They're here now. How they're here and how they got here is kind of the history of what we're talking about today. But where they're going in the future, I think I can't predict. I can't predict. But the fact is MediaTek has now become the fourth largest chipset vendor in China. The fourth. And they've moved up 10 slots amongst the global semiconductor chip vendors. They're now number 15 globally 15. But within China, they're number 3 or 4, which tells you something. They're doing something right, even if what they're doing is on the line of legit and illegit. It's on the line there. And sometimes these ShanZhai guys, what they produce is sometimes on the line or, as you say, illegal. But the fact of the matter is, what's going on is what's going on. And my goal today, our goal today was just to enlighten everyone here about these facts. Because I am not being paid by ShanZhai vendors to talk about these things, I guarantee you. So, any other questions? Maybe one from my colleague here, Scully.
Yeah. And I think, Karl, and there's a very famous and popular food, Western food, and I think it should be the first ShanZhai food. From copied from China, pizza. Yeah, Mark Polo. Yeah, during your address you mentioned. Yeah, and I think for this kind of famous food, and it is favor for the Western people, but not for the Chinese people. And it means just like ShanZhai some production. And if you and all of us cannot choose, but we can not decide other some special body not choose. So I think maybe let the market to decide and what about the ShanZhai production future. Maybe this some with innovation ideas production will be suitable for some special people, maybe not suitable for us.
The real key point is people are making money off of this stuff. Illegally or illegally, people are making money off this stuff, and it's affecting other segments of the market, positively for MediaTek, negatively for the Tier 1 vendors. And that's the real key point. The interesting point, and I remember sitting at a discussion where IP was being discussed, and this Western person was saying, oh, you Chinese people, all you do is rip off our IP. And there was a charming little lady in the audience, a Chinese lady, and she got up and said, well, we invented the compass. We invented spaghetti, or all the things the Chinese have invented. And she says, we're still waiting for our IP protection. We're still waiting for our royalties. So I guess the key point is, and also another key point is, America had its shady past in IP infringement as well. Okay, it's a phase, I think, that many countries go through, even in the United States. You just ask the ancestors of Charles Dickens 150 years ago when his novel, The Christmas Carol, was taken to the United States and just print. IP, royalty, what's that? There was one, but nobody cared. And I guess the key point is that the maturation of the environment, of the industry, of the country in respect for intellectual properties in China, I believe absolutely will come. Because I see it going on in Taiwan right now. I see it in Taiwan. People care about IP infringement in Taiwan. They will. They will. It will happen here. It's just a matter of time. And also, again, what I say about technology moving, we may see Chinese companies trying to set up factories in India, Middle East, and Africa to take cell phone technology and transfer it there. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it's not even going on right now. Okay, it would not surprise me. So we can't control technology where it goes. We can control IP, and that's what we try to do. That's what everyone tries to do. Of course, lawyers, that's their whole job. And that's the key point, I think. That's the key point. So my presentation, always controversial. My presentations are controversial. I love it. I always try to be very straightforward and honest with my answers. If I've said anything that makes somebody unhappy today, see me after the presentation. So, any other questions?
And by the way, and the spirit of ShanZhai is not only the copy, and we should be aware of so many innovation ideas in ShanZhai some production.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And let me interrupt you, because I tend to do that all the time. I have seen innovation in the bike industry here. I guarantee you it's all ShanZhai. I've seen flying pink piggy bicycles. I guarantee you nobody in the West is going to want to buy something like that. But in China, who cares? I have seen innovation in the shoe industry, especially in the sneaker industry. Cool looking products that may be ShanZhai, may be illegally copying the pattern of Adidas or Nike, Yet it's still going on. So it is not just cell phones. Key point. It is not just cell phones. I see it in the bike industry. I see it in the shoe industry. I guarantee you can see it in other industries. But it's still going on. The point is, one day, will these companies get legal? So you got milk, now you got to get your IP. Will you get IP? Will you get legal? Not up to me to say. I'm sorry, I interrupted your original statement. What were you going to say?
No, nothing.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Karl.
Does anybody have a question for Scully, though, before she leaves? I mean, I feel like I...
Actually, I think one of the most interesting is about ShanZhai. It's the ShanZhai 春节晚会, and that's the Chinese New Year Eve big
and they still have
TV
an
gala show.
official website for that.
Yeah, they still have it, and so that's the probably the epic of the whole ShanZhai. It was quite interesting, but we do need to close. So do appreciate your coming, and I think this is something very interesting. That is the groundswell societal change happening right in the society we're living in. And thank you for the presentations.
Now, some ShanZhai. I am originally, I've been in Seattle, and I've given about 100 different public speaking presentations around the world on many different topics: smartphones, mobile devices, mobile WiMAX. Started a lot of doing business with the Chinese, and many things. I enjoy to publicly speak. It should come out.
So we'll keep in touch, and I'm sure that we'll be in touch at some point. It's usually not public for us, it's more of a closed door type.
Very happy. I think we're both very happy.